I need a weapon.
Star here. Faster, faster, faster!
Hey, I leveled up. Gotta pick.
I'm back in action, boys. Calling the airstrike. They'll never shoot through this.
Let's this place here. Oh, painless, knocking at the door. Better not leave this upgrade waiting.
WDCWD 10EZEX hyphen 0 AWN 4A0.
Upgrade's collecting dust. Let's fix that.
Eleventh Gen Intel Core i7 hyphen 11700F.
Upgrade's waiting, Anita. Should take this upgrade. Always keep your boots polished.
CPU, Intel, in order.
Better not leave this upgrade waiting. Upgrade's waiting, Anita. I should lock down this next upgrade.
Fast CPU for 1080p gaming at 300 Hz.
According to Tom's Hardware, AMD's Ryzen 7 9800X3D is now the fastest gaming chip on the planet, and it isn't even close. The fastest AMD CPU for gaming is a whopping 35% in 1080p gaming than Intel's competing flagship Core Ultra 9285K, and 30% faster than Intel's previous gen flagship, the Core i9-1490K.
Upgrade's collecting dust. Let's fix that. I should lock down this next upgrade.
Amazon.
Better not leave this upgrade waiting. Upgrade's collecting dust. Let's fix that. Upgrade's waiting, Anita.
Best CPU for 1080p gaming at 300 frames per second.
Upgrading your processor? Then you're in the right place. Throughout this video, we're going to explain everything you need to know about gaming CPUs, walking you through what they are and why you need them, benchmarks to guide you through bottlenecking and gaming performance, as well as the right choices to buy at every single budget. Honestly guys, it is so easy to make a big mistake whenever you're buying a gaming CPU, and it's something that I see people make time and time again because they're listening to forums and everyone says,
Buy this CPU, it's the best.
but in actual fact you could have saved yourself a whole bunch of money or actually spent it on something else and got an even higher frame rate if you'd been armed with the knowledge that we're going to impart in this video. So join me as we explain absolutely everything central processing unit right after a short word from this video sponsor. Corsair's brand new 6500 series of cases have arrived, bringing beauty and the beastly airflow. This mighty enclosure has space for ginormous jets. Learn more today with the link down below. Rightio then, let's kick off with the big question first. What on earth is a gaming CPU? Well, it might actually surprise you to hear this, but a gaming CPU doesn't really exist, and it's just a marketing ploy to get you to spend more money on a processor than you probably need to. To be fair, we do have something relatively close, with that being AMD's X3D lineup of chips that do have extra cache on board that the processor can then use to reduce the latency of draw calls, thus increasing your FPS, but it's still a general purpose chip that drops into your motherboard and works essentially the same as any other CPU. And I'm always super keen to start with this element of clarity because it's very easy, especially for the uninitiated, to drop stuff on your desk. No, to end up buying a load of components that quite literally just say gaming in the title. And I'm not saying that these are better or worse than any of the others, but it is quite literally just a name. So if you are doing some research and you're buying stuff for your gaming PC, don't just buy one because it says gaming. Do your research on what difference it actually makes for gaming, and if you are going to spend a load of money on a processor, let's say, do you actually need to spend that amount of money, or could that money be spent better off somewhere else, like your graphics card, for instance? So okay, the term gaming can just be hot air. So what should I pay attention to instead? Well, let's break it down into chunks, starting
That's cool. Congratulations to that streamer.
with the most basic concept. A CPU is the brain of your computer, and just like your mother's weekly shopping list, it breaks down the items into a list of tasks and then executes them in order. The faster your CPU or mum, the faster the task will get done. Some tasks are what we call single-threaded, where the chip will need to be as fast as it possibly can, whereas others are multi-threaded, where we need lots of cores to do different sets of instructions all at the same time. Now, despite the fact that you think this is probably a bad idea, we are going to stick with your mum as an example here, because I think this is a genius analogy. It's like a family trying to get the dinner ready all at the same time, okay? So let's say all that needs to be done is your mum needs to go to the shops just to pick up some groceries, right? The faster she is, the faster that task is going to get executed. Fantastic. Single-threaded, single core, okay? But let's say she's got to go to multiple shops. Well, it doesn't really matter how fast she is. She's going to be limited by the fact that she has to go to multiple shops. So it would actually be a lot more efficient. It would happen faster overall if you have 3 shops, you have 3 different people or 3 cores to execute all of those tasks. And when you get home, you don't really want to have to muck around and actually, I don't know, set the table, put the drinks on the table, all this stuff. Those are background tasks, and those would have actually been quicker, they would have been more efficient if the kids had done that while you were out. And that's kind of how the tasks on a computer work, if you like. The more cores you have, to an extent, the better, but it depends on the workload. If it's just one single task, one single threaded application, the faster the better, but the more stuff that needs to be done all at the same time, then the more cores are better. I think that kind of works. I'll give myself a pat on the back for that, because I think you know how it works now. Or maybe you just don't like me insulting your mum. But I didn't do it. I just acknowledged her. She's a fine lady. So yeah, okay, that wasn't the perfect analogy, but it does bear some resemblance to how your PC does indeed handle workloads. And video games are generally pretty single-threaded applications, so the more faster, stronger cores do perform better in gaming, but having multiple cores to spread the workload out and perform those background tasks all at the same time will indeed speed up the process. Now, I've actually made a full video all about the optimum number of cores that you need will indeed speed up the process. Now, I've actually made a full video all about the optimum number of cores that you need for gaming. and how it actually affects the numbers, and the results may show you, so you can find that video in the top right hand corner of your screen if you want to check it out. But the long and short of it is that 8 is actually optimal at the moment, with 6 and in some cases even 4 enough for most video games. It's definitely really important though to understand that whilst a faster CPU is better, it doesn't actually always help, and generally speaking in games you only need your processor to be fast enough. If you spend £1,000 or $1,500 on a CPU but then you kind of skimped on the rest, that would be an ineffective way of spending your money because your CPU is doing its job, but you get to the point where it's fast enough, and anything more than that doesn't make a difference at all. This is all down to what we call bottlenecking, and every single gaming PC has one. Doesn't matter how much you spent, a bottleneck is always caused by the slowest part of your gaming PC holding back the rest of your components. And for most gamers, this will usually be the GPU, or the graphics card. And this is because most games rely on the GPU more heavily than your RAM, SSD, and indeed your CPU. So upgrading the processor wouldn't really change a lot of people's FPS at all. If, however, you have a really high-end graphics card, or you're playing a really intense game that has lots of physics, particle effects, or a high number of characters, then you might actually be bound by the limits of your CPU. And indeed, an upgrade to the processor would serve you well. And there's actually a really easy way to think about this. And don't worry, no more mum jokes. It's very straightforward. Imagine your CPU has a maximum frame rate, and your GPU has a maximum frame rate. And these will vary depending on your game and the components that you have, but the lowest one is going to be your frame rate. It doesn't matter what this is and how good this is. Again, your gap could be that, or in an ideal world, kind of trading blows, because that would mean you'd sort of got a balanced system. But yes, that's the way it works. The lowest benchmark that you're going to get is the CPU that you see in game. It's also worth remembering that higher resolutions and settings actually tend to hit the graphics card a lot more than the processor. So if you have a weaker CPU, you could always upgrade your monitor to a higher resolution for better image quality, or you could just increase the settings than the processor. So if you have a weaker CPU, you could always upgrade your monitor to a higher resolution for better image quality, or you could just increase the settings in-game, and chances are, in some cases, your frame rate could actually stay the same. But let's be honest, the biggest question you probably have right now is which brand of CPU should I go for? Should I go for Team Blue, Intel, or Team Red, AMD? And you've probably heard a lot of different things about both, and let me tell you, it's probably more complicated than it's ever been. You see, traditionally, Intel has been the de facto choice for a lot of PC gamers, as ever since the i5-2500K, they've been pumping out great and consistent gaming CPUs without ever really missing a beat, even if some of their chips were pretty lazy refreshes. Things changed massively though when AMD launched Ryzen back in 2017, bringing higher core counts to the masses, and ever since their third generation, they've been really easy to recommend, with great features, performance, pricing, and pretty low power usage. Up until the last couple of months, the choice would have been between some reliable but power-hungry Intel chips with their i5, i7, and i9s, or the better value and more focused Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7s. But unfortunately, at the time of filming, Intel was actually having some serious issues with their 13th and 14th gen desktop gaming chips, to the point where some of them are failing and they're having to extend the warranty, and they're actually issuing microcode updates to BIOSes to hopefully fix and alleviate this issue. But this causes two problems. Firstly, we don't know if this is going to impact performance. These BIOSes are landing now. I think a lot of them are in beta, but we'll be testing them to see how that impacts performance. But arguably the bigger issue is that we don't actually know whether this will entirely fix the issue of reliability, because it takes time to actually have these in the wild and to see whether this works. So recommending one of these at the time of filming, it's not impossible, but it's not something we feel necessarily comfortable doing, because you don't know 100% that that issue is going to be resolved. If you can get one in a sale, get it at a great price, and you're aware of the issue and the impacts it could have, great, go for it. But otherwise, if you are looking at Intel, then as we'll discuss a little bit later in this video when we get to all the recommendations, there are still some really good deals on the 12th gen that doesn't seem to be affected by this issue, like the 12400 that would still be very easy to recommend, and as I say, you won't have to deal with these issues. But yes, Intel at the time of filming, a little bit trickier sell. But hang on a minute, son. Before you go thinking that AMD is perfect and you have to buy Team Red, I'm afraid to say we've literally just tested the brand new Ryzen 9000 chips, and so far they are incredibly disappointing. Barely any increase to gaming performance, yet a huge increase on the real-world pricing despite a drop in the RRP. But hey, no mass reliability issues. Not the time of filming at least anyway. But as I say, don't worry, we're going to walk you through all of the benchmarks and recommendations in just a tick, but before you choose, it's also worth bearing in mind the platform that the CPU needs to go into. AMD currently use the AM5 socket, which will accept any AM5 compatible processor, as long as the BIOS is up to date, whilst Intel uses the LGA 1700 socket on 12th, 13th and 14th gen processors, again, as long as the BIOS is up to date. Different motherboards can also have completely different features, but generally speaking, the differences come down to the PCIe speeds and number of lanes, Wi-Fi, overclocking support, DDR5 versus DDR4 memory, and the number of onboard headers and ports. There's a lot to think about before you make the purchase. And then finally, the last thing that you should absolutely consider when buying your CPU is actually the power consumption. And I know,
PC-centric, that's so boring. I don't care. My mum pays for my electricity. I've got solar panels on the roof. I don't care.
well, actually, it matters more than you might think. And money is not just about how much it costs to actually use, but also the cost of the cooling in the first place. Because if you buy like a really efficient 65-watt chip, something like the Ryzen 7 7600, that actually doesn't really need much cooling at all, and this will mean that you could get away with something small, which is free actually if you go for the 7600 non-X, because it comes with a cooler inside the box, but definitely something that's relatively inexpensive, maybe around about $30–35, that will get you by. Whereas if you buy like an i9 or something like this 1300 KS, then that is going to require like a 360 rad, and you're going to need to spend so much money on it that again your already expensive CPU just got even more expensive. And this also generates a load more heat, so on a summer's day like today, it comes into your room, it's unpleasant. If you have AC, great, but here in England we don't really do that. But then also in terms of noise, obviously that's generating more noise into your room, which might bother you or you might not, maybe wearing headphones, I don't know. But personally speaking, where possible, I would actually like to have a lower powered chip that still has great performance, but then I don't need to spend as much money on cooling and I don't have to worry about noise or the heat so much. But maybe that's just me. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But I've done enough waffling now, so how about we get down to the important stuff, which is the recommendations at every single price point. We've done so many tests to bring you this information, so without further ado, let me hand you over to the man with the numbers, the one, the only, Bench Carl. And don't forget that current pricing on everything is located down below. Hooray!
Hello everybody, it's me, Bench Carl, back with some more graphs for you lovely people. First up we have Halo Infinite, a game that performed really well across all the CPUs we tested, though as you can see at each resolution, there is a clear favour in 1% lows towards the Ryzen CPUs, and if you're playing with a
Ryzen 5 960. Ryzen 5 960.
high refresh rate display, this is something you could notice during gameplay. Planet Zoo, however, is a little bit different. With a game like this, anything above 6 further and further ahead, the more. This is also a time to appear. That with all of this the pack, whilst the older, the lower core part comfortably lead. Incredibly smooth 1% applies at 40 by the CPU. Like Marcus, there's one clear winner, no matter resolution. When it comes to the Cinebench multi-core test, more cores is king. Then after that, it's all about clock speed and IPC to boost that single core performance. This is why the newer Ryzen CPUs take such a big lead over the previous generation across each resolution. The only real outliers are again the same CPUs. The 7800X3D leading the pack, whilst the older 12th gen Intel chips fall away from the newer CPUs as they're starting to show their age. Spider-Man Miles Morales seems to be a game that favors more cores, with the higher core Ryzen 9s and Intel chips putting daylight between themselves and the lower core parts. The magic of the 7800X3D just can't be matched, however. Even with fewer cores and lower power consumption, it comfortably leads at every resolution. When it comes to the Cinebench multi-core test, more cores is king. Then after that, it's all about clock speed and IPC to boost that single core performance. This is why the newer Ryzen CPUs take such a big lead over the previous generation in this test. It's a shame that just isn't the case for gaming. Taking a look at the averages across our games tested, you can see that there's one clear winner. No matter the resolution, the 7800X3D leads everything. The way more expensive Intel i9 and i7 CPUs come closest at 4K, but the 7800X3D offers incredibly smooth 1% lows as well. The same story applies at 1440p and 1080p, though the Ryzen 9 CPUs look a little bit more competitive at the lower resolution.
Ryzen 7 7800X3D.
Solutions, but you should only be grabbing one of the higher core parts if you can make use of them. Now, I've touched on it briefly, but just look at this chart for the maximum power draw by the CPU. Like Marcus said earlier, lower power draw generally means less heat and ultimately cheaper cooling. It can also enable you to get the most out of your CPU without having to accommodate a 360ml liquid cooler, or perhaps even bigger. Now let's talk about pricing and budget. If you've got less than £200 to spend and your budget is super tight, then the older 12th gen Intel CPUs offer good value and are free from the issues affecting Intel chips at the moment. Though there's no real upgrade path unless you can get a 14th gen or 13th gen chip in a few years' time for a cheap price, assuming it's free of any sort of crashing issues. But if you want a bit more platform longevity and higher average FPS, the 7600 CPUs are a really solid purchase, even with the most high-end GPUs. Even though we didn't test it, I'll give a quick shout out to the Ryzen 5 7500F. It's a 6 core of 150. Ignore the 9600X until the price comes down more in line with the 7600X, as the performance increase is just minimal. The Ryzen 7 options offer worse value for gamers, but they have more cores for multitasking or more CPU intensive loads like video editing, streaming or simulations. Though it is worth mentioning, like we saw with Spider-Man Miles Morales, more cores can come in handy for whilst costing around £30 to £40 more. But when you take a look at the options we've tested, I recommend you think about what GPU you plan on pairing with it. We've tested all our games with an RTX 4090 to highlight the differences between each CPU. But if you're going for an RTX 4070 or an RX 7700 XT, you'll find yourself to be more GPU bound than CPU bound in a lot of titles. So then your CPU choice will come down to what else you do outside of gaming and your budget available. But if you're still a bit unsure about what is the best value for you, here's what I would recommend. The 12400F if you're building on a budget and you're happy to get a new motherboard, RAM and CPU when you upgrade. The same goes for the 12600K. It's a good value option, but again, you don't really have much upgradability in the future. If you're looking at more performance and a bit more of an upgrade path, then I recommend the Ryzen 7600. I prefer the lower power consumption and the heat generated by the 7600 compared to the 7600X, and the FPS is basically the same. Not to mention you get a cooler included with the 7600 non-X part. If you want more cores and more frames, then I'd encourage encourage you to look at the Ryzen 7 7700, Ryzen 9 7900, and Ryzen 7 7800 X3D. If your priority is gaming, then grab the X3D chip. You won't regret it. It's the coolest, most power-efficient desktop CPU for gaming right now, not to mention the fastest. But if you want more cores for your workloads outside of gaming, the 7900 and 7700 are fantastic options at very close price points. If you're a gamer, trust me, you don't need a Ryzen 9 or Intel i9 CPU. No matter what anybody tells you, you'll just be using more power, needing a bigger power supply, and a beefier CPU cooler. You'll only need the 16 plus core chips if you're actually making use of them outside of gaming. So if you're planning on spending 500 plus pounds on a CPU, make sure you'll actually be using all of it. Otherwise, you could just be saving some money and buying a better GPU instead.
So then everyone, there we are. All of our recommendations at every single price point. I really hope this video has been useful. It's taken us ages, so if you have enjoyed it, please smash the like button and get yourself subscribed for more videos just like this, including our upcoming graphics card buyer's guide that will walk you through everything that you need to know in 2024. And if you do want to check out current pricing on anything featured in this video, you can find that link down below with our affiliate links. And while you're down there, why not bask in the bonanza of the Corsair 6500 series of cases? These stunning new chassis take your build to the next level, with support for cooling at the top, bottom, rear, and
Best GPU for 1080p 300 frames per second.
As a general rule, if you want to play AAA titles at 4K, then I recommend a performance level of an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070 or AMD Radeon RX 6800 or higher. For 1440p, my general recommendation is a performance level of an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060 or AMD Radeon RX 6600 XT or better. But a lot of easy to run games will work just fine at this resolution on lesser hardware. For 1080p high FPS esports gaming, I would also recommend these as the minimum GPUs, but for standard 1080p gaming, anything down to an RX 570 will do. Check the system requirements and
this graphics card
as a general
1080p GPU, 300 frames.
Another taken down.
4070 Ti. Frick.
Enemy far. Don't let them slip away.
R7.
the absolute best graphics.
Shield.
Listen up, Valorant agents. Valorant Tracker is here to help you win more matches. Featuring player stats for both teams. Instantly identify.
If you want to achieve high FPS in your favorite games, the GPU is the most important component inside of a gaming PC. This component right here will literally determine how many FPS you get and how smooth the gaming performance overall is going to be. That being said, if you are looking for a new graphics card that fits your budget and needs, and on top of that performs amazingly well in your favorite type, at 1080p resolution, I recommend you getting the RX 6750 XT from AMD or the RTX 4060 from Nvidia. Now, the RX 6750 XT is actually faster than the 4060 and will give you really high performance at 1080p, and I'm talking about 100 plus FPS on average in high demanding titles at 1080p resolution, even the most high demanding games. And here the test was made in the most high demanding games like Cyberpunk 2077 and The Last of Us Part 1, and it's also 1440p ready because you get 12 gigs of VRAM in the 6750 XT, and the level of performance at 1440p will be around 60 to 70 plus FPS in those high demanding games. So with this GPU you are getting top tier performance at 1080p, and you can also run 1440p resolution with no issues. And then when it comes to esports games, you can expect 360 plus FPS depending on your CPU once again, and then if you must have Nvidia for around the same price point for about 300 USD, you can. So with this GPU you are getting top tier performance at 1080p, and you can also run 1440p resolution with no issues. And then when it comes to esports games, you can expect 360 plus FPS depending on your CPU once again, and then if you must have Nvidia for around the same price point for about 300 USD, you can get the RTX 4060, which I have tested before in the channel, and it is one of the best GPUs from Nvidia for 1080p resolution, but it is slightly slower than the 6750 XT, and you can expect around 90 plus FPS on average in those high demanding games I've mentioned before. In esports games you can still achieve 360 plus FPS depending on the title and depending on your CPU, but overall the 4060 is a really good 1080p graphics card. Just keep in mind that it's slower for about the same price as the 6750 XT, so it's not as good in terms of price or performance, and also in the 4060 I've mentioned before. In esports games you can still achieve 360 plus FPS depending on the title and depending on your CPU, but overall the 4060 is a really good 1080p graphics card. Just keep in mind that it's slower for about the same price as the 6750 XT, so it's not as good in terms of price or performance, and also in the 4060 you get 8 gigs of VRAM instead of 12 gigs of VRAM like the 6750 XT, so it might not be as future-proof for 1080p as the 6750 XT from AMD. Now, as a bonus GPU for 1080p, if you want a budget graphics card, so you really want to spend less than 200 bucks, I recommend you going for a graphics card from the used market, and in this case I recommend you getting the RX 5700 XT. This is a GPU that performs like the RTX 3060, so really good when it comes to 1080p. I mean, you can achieve around 80 plus FPS when it comes to high demanding games, and then you can achieve 200 plus FPS in esports games, so really good performance for 1080p, and the price will be around 120 bucks. So really good price to performance, but it is going to be from the used market. And before recommended, and they achieve slower performance. These GPUs are the RTX 3050, both the 6GB version and 8GB version. Both of them have horrible pricing and the level of performance is just not there for 1080p. And then the next one is the RTX 3060 8GB version. Now the 3060 12GB version might make sense if you do something like content creation and you need more VRAM, but the 8GB version is slightly cheaper, but it is much worse and it has less VRAM, so do not get the 3060 8GB version. Now let's move to 1440p. Now 1440p is my favorite resolution. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I love this resolution because it's not as expensive as 4K, but it looks much better than 1080p, so it is the perfect balance in my opinion. And in order for a graphics card to be considered 1440p ready, well, it has to have at least 12 gigs of VRAM and the level of performance must be over 70 plus FPS in high demanding games on average. That way you ensure that you are achieving a smooth level of performance in both high demanding titles and esports games. If you are working with a tight budget and you want to play at 1440p and still achieve amazing performance, I recommend you getting the RX 7700 XT, which right now by the or the RX 7900 XT from AMD. Just like before, both are going to give you really similar from Nvidia, or the RX 7900 XT from AMD. Just like before, both are going to give you really similar gaming performance, 120 plus FPS on average in high demanding games, high to ultra settings. So here you are getting top tier performance out of both GPUs for 1440p, and the difference between these two graphics cards is basically the same.
Google AI helps you find your best customers by optimizing your campaigns in real time.
We will start with 1080p resolution, and the first graphics card that you should avoid is the RTX 3050. The 6GB version and 8GB one are actually too expensive for the level of performance that you get, especially when we compare this graphics card with the competition from Intel and AMD. Now, before moving into the next graphics card that you should avoid, I want to say that I'm covering brand new graphics cards only, so I am not covering the used market today. The next graphics card to avoid is the RX 65, as the RX 6600 provides slightly faster gaming performance, but once again the Intel drivers are not the same as the AMD ones. The next one is the RX. This one is going to be the next best option. The next one is the RTX 3060 12GB. I would only recommend this graphics card if you need more than 8 gigs of VRAM for your workloads. Let's say you're a content creator and this is going to be beneficial for you, then get the 3060 12GB version instead of the 4060. But if we are talking about pure gaming performance, the 4060 is going to be the better one in terms of value. And the last one that I haven't mentioned is the RX 7600 XT. This one has 16 gigs of VRAM, so once again, if your workloads require more than 12 gigs of VRAM, this might be the better option. Now let's talk about 1440p. Let's start with the GPUs that you should avoid for 1440p resolution. And before talking about that, I want to say that budget doesn't necessarily mean cheap. When we talk about 1440p or 4K resolution graphics cards, some of these might be expensive, but considering the market, these for a Fortnite PC, you are going to be able to play any game that you want, even the high demanding ones, 90 plus FPS on average. And then on esports shooters, like you can expect between 200 or below, we have two more graphics cards. One is the RTX 4060. I tested myself in the past, or below, we have two more graphics cards. One is the RTX 4060. I tested myself in the past for a Fortnite PC. You are going to be able to play any game that you want, even the high demanding ones, 90 plus FPS on average. And then on esports shooters, like you can expect between 240 and 360 plus FPS on average, competitive settings. So if you want to see a complete PC build with the RTX 4060, you will find that video in the top right of the screen. But I do think that there's one more graphics card that's much better in terms of price over performance, and that is the RX 6750 XT. This graphics card is going for $300 if you want to upgrade to a 1440p monitor down the line. This one is a much better option, and it also comes with 12 gigs of VRAM instead of 8 gigs of VRAM, which is ideal for 1080p right now and 1080p in modern games in the future. In this case, with the 6750 XT, you can expect over 100 FPS and over 70 FPS when it comes to 1440p high demanding games. Then if you want to play esports shooters, you can expect about the same level of performance as the 4060 depending on the CPU that you have and the esports shooter that you are playing. Now let's talk about the budget graphics cards that I haven't mentioned, and these are in the gray zone. The first one is the Intel Arc A750 down the line. This one is a much better option, and it also comes ideal for games in the future. In this case, with the 6750 XT, you can expect over 100 FPS and over 70 FPS when it comes to 1440p. This graphics card is with the RTX 4060 right of the screen, but I do think that there's one more graphics card that's much better in terms of price over performance, and that is the RX 6750 XT. This graphics card is going for $300 if you want to upgrade to a 1440p monitor down the line. This one is a much better option, and it also comes with 12 gigs of VRAM instead of 8 gigs of VRAM, which is ideal for 1080p right now and 1080p in modern games in the future. In this case, with the 6750 XT, you can
Bro, where?
for $300 if you want to upgrade to a 1440 in terms of price over performance, and that is the RX
6750. 6750. 6750. Oh, 6750. 6750.
over 70 FPS when it comes to 1440p high demanding games. Then if you want to play esports shooters, you can expect about the same level of performance as the 4060 depending on the CPU that you have and the esports shooter that you are playing. Now let's talk about the budget high demanding games. Then if you want to play esports, if you want to play FPS esports games such as Call of Duty, Fortnite, Valorant, CS2, Apex Legends, League of Legends, and these type of games, this video is going to be for start. We have the budget combo. This one has the Ryzen 5 5640 CPU, which is a mid-range 6-core processor that is going to get the job done. And then we have the RX 6650 XT, which is one of the best GPUs in terms of price to performance, in my opinion. This CPU and GPU combo right now is $365, and in terms of performance, it will give you over 200 FPS on average in esports shooters. Usually for Fortnite, I do recommend going with an NVIDIA GPU, but those are going to on your combo for 550.
Please, let me join your guild. I want to be a part of a team.
Hello and welcome to the Scatterball channel, and today let me show you what are the best and worst graphics cards to buy for the month of October. And this month is worth looking into because Amazon is hosting yet again another Prime Day up on Amazon. Not even Newegg. Yeah, literally just on Amazon, at least in the United States. If you look at it right now, you can actually grab a Radeon RX 6800 XT straight from ASRock for $430. Now, I'm aware there's another model from XFX for $400, which sounds like a really excellent deal. My issue with that is the seller is not from like Amazon themselves. It's from some seller called like whatever it is. So I'm not too sure if that's trustworthy or not, because I know there have been some questionable RX 7000 cards listed on sale for Amazon, but you can get this ASRock 6800 XT you see here for $430 right now on Amazon. And if that goes on any sort of discount, which I think it will, that'll be an absolute pickup, because knowing where this graphics card, the RX 6800, could go, this is probably not going to get discounted any lower than $360. But if the 6800 XT gets discounted to anywhere close to $400, I'd pick up the 6800 XT over the 6800. And this is just a 6800 on steroids. The 6800 XT crushes anything at 1440p. You guys might know it, but it trades blows with the 7800 XT depending on the game. Just the only downside is that it consumes a ton of power for its price. So if you're fine with that, or if you want to undervolt it when you get it at your doorstep, that's a way to handle it. Otherwise, it just offers a lot of raw performance. But once again, this is an RX 6000 card. It doesn't have any onboard AI compute units, so it can't utilize FSR4 when that does come out. But like I said, the 6800 might be worth looking into. Right now it's about $380, but it's probably going to go down to $360 during those Prime Day deals. But again, if the 6800 XT can be had for only $40 to $50 more, I would have to choose that over this. But either way, both graphics cards have 16 gigabytes of memory. Both are going to do excellent at 1440p. Both are really excellent value options. I would choose either of these if you want just no compromises 1440p gaming. But now if you want compromised 1440p gaming, well, you got yourself the RTX 4060 Ti. Why is it a compromising graphics card? Well, it comes with 8 gigabytes of VRAM for $375. I just told you like 2 minutes ago, the main reason why the 4060 was weak is because it had 8 gigabytes of memory, and there's already graphics cards in its price segment that are maxing out above 12 gigabytes of VRAM in games like Starfield. And you got the 4060 here in a whole other price bracket with only 8. And it's not even like true 8 gigabytes of VRAM. I wouldn't say true, but it's cheap. It has a really small 128-bit memory bus. That is the same as some of the cheaper graphics cards we covered earlier, but again, this has a really hefty price premium. It's slow, it has a small amount of VRAM, it's overpriced. This is a no-go for 1440p gaming at all, period. It's not even good for AI either, because it lacks VRAM. So what should you buy instead of that 4060 Ti? Well, you can pick up either of the two RX 6000 cards I just described, but if you want something that could potentially utilize AI upscaling, other than what NVIDIA provides with their own DLSS Gen 3.0, you can get the 7700 XT for about $370. This can utilize FSR4 when that does come out eventually, but unlike the 4060 Ti, this does have some pretty good hardware for the money. Yes, it may only have 12 gigabytes of memory, but it is on the updated RX 7000 architecture. Overall, it's also still a really nice 1440p gaming graphics card, but its performance more or less is in line with the RX 6800. So I would say, while this at $370 is one of the lowest I've ever seen for a 7700 XT, if this at all can get to $360 or $350, that'd be a slam dunk. I would absolutely pick up a 7700 XT for $350. Otherwise, I'm really curious to know if those RX 6000 cards I just mentioned earlier will be on any other hefty discounts, as those should be end of life. But like I said, just about the only thing those older cards lack that this newer one will have are the onboard AI compute units on this, which can utilize FSR4 when that comes out, and if it's good at all. But that's just a matter of future proofing if you're in the market for a Radeon card. But going back down in price, there are a few graphics cards for just above $300 I do want to give some shout outs to. Rather than say getting a 4060, you can get an RX 7600 XT. This has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. It's actually not too terrible. I used this graphics card in my $700 gaming PC, and what I found useful is that in AAA PC games where you can max out the VRAM really easily, this has so much to play around with that it's kind of like worry-free as long as the graphics card is still fast enough for the game you want to play. It was fast enough for Starfield thanks to FSR frame generation, which also uses up additional VRAM. So I think in some instances when it comes to AAA gaming, this
Harry, I will train. Morning, noon.
being a newer graphics card that can utilize frame generation and having more VRAM kind of works out. Whereas the 6700 XT and 6750 XT can be had for about the same price. And while these are technically the faster graphics cards, these only come with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So if we were in an instance, say on Starfield, and we were maxing out our VRAM at above 12 gigabytes of VRAM with ultra settings with frame generation turned on, you might be running out of VRAM already on a 12 gigabyte graphics card. But I wouldn't be too worried about that because I don't expect you guys to push the latest AAA PC game at ultra settings on a card like this, because still 12 gigabytes of VRAM is quite plenty. And after all, this is the faster graphics card, but it is something to think about. Maybe the 7600 XT is actually making a little more sense now with some of the latest PC games coming out, since this just has so much VRAM to work with, even if it has the smaller 128-bit memory bus. But the 6700 XT and 6750 XT are not bad options either. I would say if you're more of an FPS esports gamer and you're just looking for pure frame rate at 1440p, you're not looking at playing the latest AAA game completely maxed out, I pick up one of these for $300 or $310. In between the two, if I had an extra $10, I would get the 6750 XT. That extra $10 is worth it for the faster card. Now, what isn't worth it is the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte. Now, this can be had for about $430, and yes, it does have good. But I wonder if this graphics card will go down in price any further. I really think, with the exception of Intel Arc, Radeon is going to be the brand to look at for